Maya's bare feet had grown numb from the cold sand as she combed the shoreline for anything salvageable: bottles for the 5-cent return, driftwood for her makeshift shelter, maybe even some edible seaweed if she was lucky. The pre-dawn darkness was her friend. Fewer people meant fewer questions about why a 16-year-old girl was scavenging alone on Venice Beach. She'd been living rough for 8 months now, ever since aging out of her last foster home with nowhere to go. The rhythmic crash of waves had become her lullaby, and the salt air her constant companion. That's when she saw them. 2 figures sprawled motionless, where the tide had deposited them like broken dolls. A man in what had once been an expensive suit, now torn and waterlogged, lay face down in the wet sand. Beside him, a small child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, curled in a fetal position. Maya's heart hammered as she rushed toward them, her survival instincts warring with her conscience. She'd learned to avoid trouble, to stay invisible, but she couldn't walk away from this. The man was unconscious, but breathing, a nasty gash across his forehead still seeping blood. The child, a little girl with curly hair plastered to her skull, was awake but silent, her dark eyes wide with shock and fear. Maya gently touched the girl's shoulder, speaking in the soft, reassuring voice she remembered from better times. "Hey there, sweetheart. I'm Maya. You're going to be okay." The child didn't respond, just stared at her with those haunting eyes that held too much understanding for someone so young. Maya looked around desperately. The beach was empty except for a few early joggers in the distance. She knew she should call 911, but her experiences with authorities had taught her caution. Still, these people needed help that she couldn't provide alone. She pulled out the cracked phone she'd managed to keep charged at the library and made the call, staying close to the child who had begun to shiver violently. As she waited for help to arrive, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change everything, not just for the man and child she'd found, but for herself as well. The hospital waiting room smelled of disinfectant and desperation, familiar scents that brought back memories Maya preferred to forget. She sat in a plastic chair, still wearing her salt-stained clothes, fielding questions from a police officer who looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and pity. Detective Rodriguez was kind enough, but Maya had learned to read between the lines of adult concern. They were wondering what a homeless black teenager was doing on the beach at dawn, whether she was somehow involved in whatever had happened to the unconscious man and traumatized child. "The little girl keeps asking for you," the detective said, flipping through his notepad. "She won't speak to anyone else, won't even tell us her name. The man is stable but hasn't regained consciousness yet. No identification on either of them, but his clothes, his watch, expensive stuff. We're thinking maybe a boating accident, but we need more information." Maya nodded, her mind racing. She'd given them her real name and what little information she could, but she sensed they wanted more than she could provide. When they finally let her see the child, Maya found her sitting in a hospital bed that seemed to swallow her tiny frame. The girl's clothes had been replaced with a hospital gown covered in cartoon animals, and her hair had been cleaned and combed, revealing beautiful spiral curls. But those eyes, they still held that same shell-shocked expression. "Hi, sweetheart," Maya said softly, settling into the bedside chair. "Do you remember me? I'm Maya, from the beach." The child's face brightened slightly, and she reached out with one small hand. Maya took it gently, feeling the tremor that still ran through the girl's body. "Daddy," the child whispered, her first word since being found. "Where's my daddy?" Maya's heart clenched. She glanced toward the door, knowing the man was several rooms away, fighting his own battle for consciousness. "He's resting, just like you need to," Maya said. "The doctors are taking very good care of him. Can you tell me your name, honey?" The girl studied Maya's face for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust her. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Zoe. My name is Zoe, and my daddy is very important." The words were spoken with the careful precision of a child repeating something she'd been taught, and Maya wondered what kind of important had led a father and daughter to wash up unconscious on her stretch of beach. 3 days later, Marcus Wellington III opened his eyes to a world that didn't make sense. The last thing he remembered was being on his yacht with Zoe, heading out for what was supposed to be a simple sunset cruise. Now he was in a hospital bed, his head pounding and his memory fragmented like pieces of a shattered mirror. A nurse noticed his movement and rushed to his side, calling for a doctor while checking his vitals with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Wellington, you're in Cedars-Sinai Medical Center," Dr. Patel explained once she arrived. "You were found on Venice Beach 3 days ago, unconscious from what appears to be a head injury. You were in the water for some time." Marcus tried to process this information, but one thought overwhelmed everything else. "Zoe," he croaked, his throat raw. "My daughter. Where's my daughter?" The relief on the doctor's face told him what he needed to know before she even spoke. "She's safe. A young woman found both of you and called for help. Your daughter is physically unharmed, though understandably traumatized." When they wheeled Marcus down the hall to see Zoe, he wasn't prepared for the scene that greeted him. His daughter sat cross-legged on the hospital bed, animatedly talking to a teenage girl with short natural hair and eyes that held an old soul's wisdom. It was the first time Marcus had seen Zoe truly engaged with anyone since her mother's death 6 months ago. The girl, Maya, the nurses had told him, was showing Zoe how to make paper flowers from hospital napkins, their heads bent together in concentration. "Daddy." Zoe's face lit up when she saw him, and she carefully slid down from the bed to run to his wheelchair. Marcus held her tight, breathing in the scent of hospital soap and something uniquely his daughter. Over Zoe's head, he met Maya's eyes and saw something there that made him pause, a protective fierceness that reminded him of a lioness guarding her cubs. This stranger had been watching over his daughter, had stayed by her side when he couldn't. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything he couldn't yet express. Maya nodded, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable. "She's a special kid," Maya replied. "Smart and brave. She was asking about you constantly." Marcus studied this girl who had saved them both, noting the careful way she held herself, the quality clothes that had seen better days, the pride that kept her spine straight despite circumstances he was beginning to understand. He had a feeling that finding Maya on that beach had been about more than rescue. It had been about destiny. The social worker's expression was professionally sympathetic but firm as she explained the situation to Marcus. "Mr. Wellington, while we've verified your identity and the circumstances of the accident, there are some concerns about Zoe's care during your recovery. You'll be here for at least another week, and she can't stay in the hospital indefinitely. We have excellent foster care options available temporarily." Marcus cut her off with a wave of his hand that still trembled slightly from his ordeal. "What about Maya?" he asked, surprising everyone in the room, including himself. "The girl who found us. Zoe is bonded with her, and frankly, she seems to be the only person my daughter trusts right now." The social worker, Miss Chun, frowned and consulted her files. "Maya Johnson is a 16-year-old ward of the state herself. She's currently experiencing housing instability and certainly isn't qualified to provide care for your daughter." The clinical language couldn't hide the reality. Maya was homeless, just like Marcus was beginning to suspect. Later that day, when Maya arrived for her daily visit with Zoe, Marcus asked to speak with her privately. They sat in the hospital's small family lounge, Maya perched on the edge of her chair, as if ready to flee at any moment. "The social worker told me about your situation," Marcus said gently. Maya's jaw tightened, and she started to stand. "I don't need your pity," she said, but Marcus held up a hand. "That's not what this is about. This is about my daughter, who lights up every time you walk into that room. This is about the fact that she's spoken more words to you in 3 days than she has to anyone else in 6 months." Maya sat back down slowly, her expression guarded. "She's been through a lot," she said simply. "Sometimes kids just need someone who gets it." Marcus nodded, thinking about his own privileged childhood, his boarding schools and nannies, the way money had always been a buffer between him and real hardship. "What happened to your family?" he asked quietly. Maya was silent for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke. "Foster care, since I was 7. My mom died of an overdose, never knew my dad. Aged out of the system 8 months ago with nowhere to go. That's the short version." The matter-of-fact way she said it broke something in Marcus's chest. Here was a girl who had every reason to be bitter, angry at the world, yet she had risked her own safety to save strangers on a beach. She had stayed by his daughter's side, asking for nothing in return. "I have a proposition," he said carefully. "I need someone to help with Zoe during my recovery and beyond. Someone she trusts. I'm offering you a job and a place to stay." Maya's eyes narrowed. "I'm not a charity case," she said, but Marcus shook his head. "No, you're not. You're exactly what my daughter needs right now. The question is, are you willing to help us?" Moving into the Wellington estate in Malibu was like stepping into a different universe. Maya stood in the marble foyer, her few possessions in a battered backpack, trying to process the sheer scale of wealth surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across walls lined with original artwork, and the ocean view through floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to stretch into infinity. She'd known Marcus was wealthy. The private hospital room and expensive lawyers who'd appear to handle the incident had made that clear, but this level of opulence was beyond her imagination. Zoe, however, seemed subdued as she led Maya through the house, her small hand clutching Maya's tightly. "This is the kitchen," she said in a flat voice, gesturing toward a space larger than most apartments Maya had lived in. "Maria makes my meals, but she doesn't like it when I help. And this is the living room, but we're not supposed to touch anything because it's all very expensive." The robotic way Zoe recited this information made Maya's heart ache. This wasn't a home. It was a museum where a little girl existed, but didn't truly live. Marcus, still moving carefully due to his injuries, caught up with them in what he called the family room, though it felt anything but familial with its pristine white furniture and intimidating artwork. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said, noting Maya's expression. "To be honest, it feels overwhelming to me sometimes too." This was more Catherine's vision than mine. Catherine, Zoe's mother, whose presence still haunted every perfectly appointed room despite her absence. That first night, Maya sat on the edge of the bed in her assigned room, larger than any space she'd ever called her own, trying to understand what she'd agreed to. Through the walls, she could hear Zoe crying, the soft, heartbroken sobs of a child trying not to be heard. Without thinking, Maya padded down the hall and gently knocked on Zoe's door. "Can I come in, sweetheart?" she whispered. Inside, she found Zoe huddled under covers in a bed that seemed designed more for display than comfort. "I don't like it here," Zoe confessed. "It's too quiet and too big, and everything reminds me of Mommy." Maya's heart broke a little more as she climbed into the bed and pulled the small girl close. "Then we'll just have to figure out how to make it feel more like home," she whispered into Zoe's curls, and for the first time since the beach, both of them slept peacefully through the night. The morning brought new challenges and the stark reality of what Maya had signed up for. Mrs. Henderson, the estate manager who had worked for the Wellington family for 2 decades, made her disapproval clear from the moment Maya appeared in the kitchen for breakfast. "Mr. Wellington has made his wishes clear regarding your position," she said crisply, "but I want you to understand that this household has standards and routines that have served us well. Zoe has structure, tutoring, music lessons, appropriate social activities with children from suitable families." Maya bit back her initial response, recognizing the coded language for what it was. Instead, she watched as Zoe picked listlessly at her perfectly prepared breakfast, her shoulders hunched with a tension that seemed too heavy for such small bones. "What if we started slower?" Maya suggested. "Maybe Zoe could show me around the neighborhood, help me get oriented?" Mrs. Henderson's expression suggested Maya had proposed burning down the house, but Marcus, who had been silently observing the interaction, nodded his approval. The walk along the private beach behind the estate revealed more about both Zoe and her world than any of Mrs. Henderson's lectures could have. "Mommy and I used to collect shells here," Zoe said, stopping at a titline where the waves had deposited a treasure trove of sea glass and smooth stones. "But after she got sick, Daddy said it was too dangerous for me to come out here alone." Maya knelt beside her, examining a particularly beautiful piece of turquoise glass. "Your mom sounds like she was pretty special," she said carefully. Zoe nodded solemnly. "She was the best at everything. Mrs. Henderson says I should try to be more like her." The weight of expectation in those words made Maya's chest tighten. She thought about her own childhood, the way she'd been shuffled between homes, always trying to become whatever version of herself each new family wanted, never quite succeeding. "You know what I think," Maya said, settling cross-legged in the sand. "I think you should try to be like you. Your mom fell in love with your daddy partly because of who he was, right? Not because he was pretending to be someone else." Zoe considered this seriously, then picked up another shell and placed it carefully in Maya's palm. "Maybe we could start a new collection," she said quietly. "Just ours." That afternoon, Marcus found them in the sunroom, sorting their beach treasures and creating elaborate stories about where each piece had come from. Zoe was more animated than he'd seen her in months, her hands moving expressively as she spun tales of underwater kingdoms and brave sea creatures. Maya listened with the kind of focused attention that made Zoe glow with importance, occasionally adding details that sent the little girl into giggles. Watching them, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Catherine's diagnosis, hope that his daughter might find her way back to joy. The yacht accident had been no accident at all. Marcus stared at the investigative report spread across his home office desk, the words blurring as the implications sank in. The explosion that had torn through the engine compartment had been deliberately caused, and the list of people who might want him dead was disturbingly long. As one of the youngest billionaires in tech history, he'd made enemies along with his fortune, business rivals he'd outmaneuvered, employees he'd had to lay off during company restructuring, ex-partners who felt cheated out of success. Detective Rodriguez sat across from him, her expression grim. "We're looking into several leads, but I have to ask, do you have somewhere safe to take your daughter while we investigate? Someone tried to kill you once, Mr. Wellington. They might try again, and next time you might not be lucky enough to wash up where someone like Maya could find you." Marcus thought about the teenager upstairs, probably helping Zoe with her homework or listening to another elaborate story about imaginary adventures. The idea of putting Maya in danger made his stomach churn, but the thought of separating her from Zoe seemed equally impossible. Maya noticed the change in the household atmosphere immediately. Security personnel appeared overnight, their presence both reassuring and ominous. Marcus became more withdrawn, spending hours on encrypted phone calls and looking over his shoulder even in his own home. When Zoe asked why there were suddenly men with earpieces stationed around their house, Maya struggled to find an age-appropriate explanation that wouldn't terrify the child who had already lost so much. The conversation Maya had been dreading came that evening. Marcus called her into his office after Zoe was asleep, and the weight of his responsibility was etched in every line of his face. "I need to tell you something," he began, then explained about the investigation, the threats, the very real possibility that someone was still trying to hurt his family. "I understand if you want to leave," he concluded. "This isn't what you signed up for, and I won't blame you for choosing your own safety." Maya was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the scared little girl upstairs who had finally started sleeping through the night, who had laughed today while they painted pictures of their beach treasures. "That little girl has already lost her mother," she said finally. "I won't let her lose anyone else if I can help it." Marcus felt something shift in his chest to her words, not just gratitude, but a recognition that this young woman had become essential to their small family in ways that went far beyond her official role. "There's something else," Maya continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was saying. "If someone is trying to hurt you and Zoe, then we need to be smarter about this. I grew up learning how to survive, how to read danger, how to disappear when I needed to. Maybe it's time you learn some of those skills too." The transformation of the Wellington estate into something resembling a fortress happened gradually, but Maya's influence was unmistakable. She taught Marcus things he'd never learned in his privileged upbringing: how to vary his routines, how to spot surveillance, how to think like someone who had to watch their back every day. More importantly, she showed him how to help Zoe feel secure without scaring her, turning safety protocols into games and adventures that made the little girl feel empowered rather than vulnerable. "We're going to play a new game," Maya announced to Zoe one morning, producing a set of walkie-talkies. "It's called Secret Agents, and the most important rule is that we always know where each other are." Zoe's eyes lit up with excitement as Maya explained the code words they would use and the safe spots. throughout the house where they could hide if they needed to. What looked like play to a 5-year-old was actually sophisticated security training, and Marcus marveled at Maya's ability to make something frightening feel like an adventure. The lessons went both ways. Marcus taught Maya about the world she'd never had access to, how wealth and power operated, the networks of influence and obligation that governed his universe. He helped her understand the investigation into the yacht bombing, the complex web of business relationships and rivalries that might have motivated someone to try to kill him. Knowledge is power, he told her as they reviewed police reports together. And you need to understand the landscape if you're going to help protect us. Maya's street smarts combined with Marcus's resources created an unexpected synergy. She suggested security measures his expensive consultants had overlooked, noticed things their trained professionals missed. When she pointed out that the landscaping crew had changed their routine, Marcus realized she was right to be suspicious. One of the new workers was photographing the house rather than trimming hedges. Her instincts, honed by years of survival, had become their early warning system. But perhaps the most important change was in Zoe herself. The frightened, withdrawn child who had barely spoken for months was blossoming under Maya's unconventional care. She was learning not just to feel safe, but to be an active participant in her own security. When she spotted an unfamiliar car parked across the street for 3 consecutive days, she immediately reported it to Maya, proud to be contributing to their family's safety. The confidence that came from feeling capable rather than helpless was transforming her from the inside out, and Marcus knew that Maya had given his daughter something no amount of money could buy: resilience. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Zoe, playing with her new tablet in the garden, accidentally accessed an old email account that had belonged to her mother. The messages she found weren't the usual correspondence Marcus would have expected. They were communications with someone named David Hartley, a former business partner of Marcus's who had been forced out of their company 5 years earlier after Marcus discovered he'd been embezzling funds. The messages revealed a different side of Catherine, one that Marcus had never seen. Maya found Marcus in his office, staring at printouts of the emails with an expression of devastation that made her heart ache for him. "She was going to leave me," he said quietly. Catherine had been planning to take Zoe and disappear with Hartley. They had been having an affair for over a year. The betrayal in his voice was raw, but Maya noticed something else in the emails that Marcus had missed in his emotional state. "Look at the dates," she said gently. "These emails stopped 6 months before she died. And look at this one. She's telling him it's over, that she realized she made a mistake." The realization hit them both at the same time. If Hartley had lost Catherine and any claim to Marcus's fortune, if he'd been facing exposure and jail time for the embezzlement, he would have had powerful motives for revenge. But the evidence also revealed something else. Catherine had been genuinely trying to repair her marriage before her illness. The woman Marcus had mourned wasn't the woman who had written those emails. She had chosen to stay, to fight for their family, even if she hadn't lived long enough to fully heal the damage she'd done. Detective Rodriguez arrived within hours of Marcus's call, and the investigation shifted into high gear. Hartley had disappeared from his last known address 3 weeks earlier, right around the time Marcus had decided to take Zoe on the yacht trip that had nearly killed them both. Financial records showed he'd hired maritime mercenaries, men who specialized in making accidents look convincing. The yacht bombing hadn't been meant to look like an accident. It had been meant to ensure there were no survivors. That night, as they waited for news of Hartley's arrest, Maya sat with Marcus in the family room while Zoe slept peacefully upstairs, finally feeling secure in her own home. "I'm sorry about Catherine," Maya said quietly. "About what you learned today." Marcus nodded, staring out at the ocean where he'd almost died. "The strange thing is, I think I'm actually grateful. Not for the affair, but for knowing that she chose us in the end. That she was trying to make things right." Maya understood that kind of gratitude, the complicated relief that came from knowing that someone who'd hurt you had also loved you enough to try to change. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a kind of peace that made moving forward possible. 6 months later, Maya stood on the same stretch of Venice Beach where she'd found Marcus and Zoe, but everything had changed. The Maya Johnson Foundation for Aging Out Youth was celebrating its official launch, housed in a renovated building just blocks from the shore. The organization would provide housing, education, and job training for teenagers transitioning out of foster care, run by someone who understood their challenges intimately because she'd lived them herself. Marcus watched from the podium as Maya addressed the crowd of donors, social workers, and foster kids who had come to witness this moment. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, her natural confidence evident as she spoke about second chances and the power of unexpected connections. "A year ago, I was sleeping rough on this very beach," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the assembled crowd. "I thought I knew what my life was going to be, survival mode, day after day, just trying to make it through. But sometimes the tide brings in exactly what you need, even when you don't know you're looking for it." Zoe, now 6 and radiating the kind of confidence that came from being deeply loved and truly secure, stood beside her father holding a bouquet of flowers for Maya. The traumatized child who had washed ashore that dawn had grown into a vibrant little girl who spoke multiple languages. Maya had insisted on Spanish lessons, could identify dozens of seashells and sea creatures, and possessed an unshakable faith in her own ability to handle whatever life might bring. The nightmares had stopped months ago, replaced by dreams of adventures she and Maya would have together. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, the three of them walked together along the water's edge. They had become something that defied easy definition, not quite a traditional family, but something deeper and more chosen than blood relations. Maya had legally changed her name to Maya Johnson Wellington, not as an adoption but as a recognition of the bonds they had forged. She was Zoe's guardian and Marcus's partner in both business and life, though their relationship had evolved slowly, built on respect and shared purpose rather than desperation or gratitude. "Do you ever miss it?" Marcus asked Maya as they watched Zoe chase seagulls along the phone line. The simplicity of not having so much responsibility? Maya considered the question seriously, thinking about the girl she'd been a year ago. Hungry, alone, but free from the weight of other people's expectations. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember what I was missing when life was simple. Zoe's laugh when she beats me at checkers. The way you get excited about boring financial reports. Having people who worry when I'm 5 minutes late coming home." She paused, bending to examine a piece of sea glass that caught her eye. "I guess I learned that some complications are worth it." As the sun began to set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, they headed home to their unconventional life. Behind them, the waves continued their eternal dance, erasing their footprints from the sand but never quite able to wash away the memory of the morning when the tide had brought them together. Some rescues, Maya had learned, saved everyone involved, and some families were built not from shared blood, but from shared storms that revealed what people were truly made of. In the distance, the lights of the Malibu house welcomed them home, no longer a museum but a place where three unlikely souls had discovered that love could bloom in the most unexpected places, nurtured by courage, watered by hope, and sustained by the simple radical act of choosing each other, again and again, no matter what tides might come.